Welcome to the She Leads podcast, a space that empowers women like you to build success in a way that feels authentic, energizing, and aligned with who you really are. In a world that tries to convince us that success means hustling harder and following everyone else's rules, we're here to rewrite the script. This is about success that feels nourishing, not depleting. Success that brings the fulfillment, impact, and recognition you deserve, whilst ultimately giving you the financial power to create the future you want and inspire meaningful change in the world around you. Make sure to hit the follow button so that you never miss an episode, and come and say hello on Instagram. You can find us at she_leads.academy. Let's dive in. Hello ladies, and welcome to a brand new episode of the She Leads show. If you are an introvert, or perhaps, like myself, you are an extroverted introvert, this episode is for you. I'll just quickly say what I mean by extroverted introvert, because maybe you're hearing this for the first time. And when I first heard this, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So this is basically someone who identifies primarily as an introvert. So they will recharge through things like solitude, reflection. They need a lot of alone time, but they're also somebody who perhaps to other people, they perhaps seem quite extroverted. They're somebody who enjoys and maybe even thrives in extroverted activities like socializing or networking. Maybe they're even confident enough to do things like public speaking. The key distinction really is energy. So for me, as an extroverted introvert, a lot of people just assume that I'm very extroverted, I'm very confident, but that's something that I've really had to build, and it's not necessarily something that has come naturally to me. And whilst I can, be at networking events and chat freely with people, I can be on a stage and I can talk in front of a room, I can engage in lively conversation. Afterwards, I feel completely depleted and I need a lot of alone time to rest and recharge. And I have to be very mindful of how many social things I'm doing. And I often feel drained if I'm required to be on for too long. I remember actually the beginning of my coaching journey, and I convinced myself I wanted to be the female version of Tony Robbins. And I'm like, wow. I think I was really disillusioned about what I felt success should look like, which is, I think, something we're really going to dive into for this episode. But there is absolutely no way I could do what he does in terms of being on a stage for that amount of time. For me, an hour is probably enough. Even after I've done a coaching session, I put a lot of energy into my sessions and I'm showing up for my clients. And even after sort of an hour, 2 hours, I really do need to just take that time for myself and just be in a quiet room and not talk to anybody. So maybe you resonate with that. If so, as I said, this episode is for you. And really what I want to dive into is how we can really rethink success itself as introverts. I think for too long, we've really been sold this very narrow definition of success, which is the loudest voice in the room, the one who maybe dominates in the meetings, the person that networks relentlessly. Maybe if we're talking about business owners, the one who's always visible, always doing sort of live streams and sort of very confident online. We're kind of taught that visibility is equated with value, and it's if performance only counts when it's accompanied by volume. And this assumption, it really does run deep in corporate cultures and I think society at large. The people who talk the most in meetings, for example, when I worked in corporate, were often, mistaken for the smartest ones, the ones with the best ideas. I think as well in business, the ones who self-promote the most aggressively are assumed to be the most successful, the most capable, the ones most worthy of hiring. Those who dominate airtime are often rewarded with that influence. We hear this often from online marketers. The more frequently you show up, the more you're going to build your audience. And for an introvert, that can feel very exhausting and unsustainable. So I want to pose a question. What if visibility doesn't equal value at all? What if sometimes actually that is hiding a lack of substance, whilst quiet brilliance, that subtler power actually goes unnoticed. And this obsession with visibility can actually, I think, distort decision making. So if we think about this in a corporate context, it might be a leader overestimating the competence of extroverted personalities within their team while overlooking introverts who could really contribute something meaningful, but do it in a less noisy way, but with far more depth. We could also think about when people are hiring somebody. If we think about especially the coaching industry, people will often gravitate to somebody who has built up a loud, visible brand, that they're always online, they're showing up consistently. And again, that visibility has perhaps distorted their decision making. And maybe later down the line, they come to realize that the people that they've been following, the loudest voices, are not necessarily the wisest ones. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that loudness isn't the same as leadership. And I definitely know that this applies to business owners, because a business owner or coach certainly doesn't need to be everywhere, shouting from every platform in order to create influence. In fact, some of the most successful entrepreneurs are behind the scenes quietly building powerful businesses by leaning into depth. Their strength isn't necessarily being the noisiest in the market, but being the one whose work is remembered and respected long after the noise dies down. So as I mentioned, I know firsthand, as I am what I call an extroverted introvert. So I can step onto a stage, I can lead a group, but afterwards I do need to retreat. And I definitely felt for a long time, or maybe this is making me less effective. What if I could be more like Tony Robbins and just on all the time and showing up in this really powerful, energetic way? And maybe if I was a true extrovert, and if I just could maybe just fake it until I made it, that was what was required. And what I've really discovered instead is that this rhythm that I have is actually an asset. And my time that I spend away, maybe it's in taking time offline, maybe it's taking sort of quiet time away from my business, maybe it's just spending more time by myself. This time gives me more clarity, more creativity, more perspective to make my visible moments more powerful. So I know now that I don't need to be everywhere. I just need to be impactful in the places that I choose to be. And I think that in a world that's oversaturated with noise, introversion can be very much a strategic advantage. So whilst others are shouting to be heard, introverts are observing, we're processing, we're maybe noticing what others are missing. And in environments, especially where speed and constant output are glorified, like let's say corporate environments, I think the introvert's ability to pause and reflect and think deeply can really lead to insights that actually shift entire industries. And so what can look like maybe restraint or holding back or shyness from the outside is often precision on the inside. And the real power is not always showing up bigger, louder, faster. Sometimes it is showing up less and doing so in ways that actually make a sharper impact. So invisibility, let's talk about that for a second. Often in the online space, especially, people are talking about getting visible and showing up, but invisibility, when it is intentional, can actually create mystique and also even authority. And then if we are slowing down, it's going to allow for more depth, more original ideas. My best ideas have always come in the times when I've taken time out, or I've slowed down, or I've allowed myself to rest. Now, speaking of rest, when it comes to introverts, energy is like a currency. It is for all of us, but it's more important for introverts because, just like capital, our energy needs to be invested wisely. It needs to be diversified across different priorities, and it also needs to be fiercely protective. And often success is framed as this game of this constant output, more hours, more exposure, more visibility. But introverts know that energy spent carelessly is just energy lost. And without our energy, there's no creativity, there's ultimately no impact. So the phrase I like to use here is energy economics. So this basically means treating your energy like you would kind of like a financial portfolio. So where do you want the biggest returns? What's draining you with little payoff? So it might be an hour spent on deep thinking or doing something creative, or, an hour spent doing something that really energizes you may generate exponentially more value than 3 hours of doing something that is completely just draining you. So the key is to just really budget your energy with the same kind of rigor as you would with money, and spend it where it compounds. Now, I want to talk about a phrase, maybe you've heard this before, maybe it's new to you, asynchronous influence. So I want to talk about this a little bit. So listen to this bit carefully, because introverts really thrive through asynchronous influence. So if we think about the culture that we're in, it often prizes immediacy, so quick responses, constant availability, instant performance, and power is often assumed to belong to those who can dominate in real time. And this is why often the loudest voices, whether that's in a meeting or, the person that's replying to emails at midnight, the coach who is constantly online, the business owner who's very, very visible, these are things that are often assumed to kind of, be equal to the most success. But influence doesn't have to work on that timeline. So for introverts, some of the most enduring impact can come through, again, this word, asynchronous influence, which is basically shaping the conversation without needing to constantly be occupying the room. So the roots really of this asynchronous influence, it lies in depth over immediacy. And maybe if you are an online business owner, you felt this sense of immediacy, like I have to be online today, I have to be showing up every single day as often as possible. There's this immediacy, which, even thinking about it, actually, it feels pretty exhausting. So whilst extroverted cultures value speed and presence, introverts, they really thrive in reflection, and really in creating ideas that have longevity rather than urgency. So what this essentially means is that the influence of an introvert comes through creating things that will continue to shape decisions or influence people long after they've been created. So let's say, for example, a business owner, maybe they write a blog post. So basically they're creating an asset, and this blog post keeps working for them long after they've created it, they've stepped away. So even, maybe even years later, people continue to find this post through a search, they share it with colleagues, or they share it with their friends or family, they take action based on its insights. So the work of this post compounds. One act of creation leads to ongoing influence. Now, let's contrast this with the business owner who feels pressured to constantly show up online. They're posting multiple times a day on Instagram, they're dancing on reels, they're scrambling to stay visible in noisy feeds, and their content may get attention in the moment, but it's gone within 24 hours. It's buried by the algorithm, and it's maybe even forgotten as quickly as it appeared. Even viral content, the longevity of viral content is still pretty short. And this cycle for an introvert is exhausting. For an extrovert, they may be energized by this, and they may get sort of that motivation and excitement and energy from this constant showing up. But for introverts, it's draining. Visibility that depends on this constant performance. And what happens often with this type of performance is that the influence evaporates the moment that they stop showing up. So really the difference here is sustainability. So asynchronous influence, it's not about relying on constant energy output. It's about building authority that endures. So this always on, always showing up model, it burns energy very fast for very short-term visibility. And I think something that I've also come to really learn is that the most powerful impact can often happen when you're not even in the room. So influence isn't necessarily always about being present, being visible. It's about resonance. So a great leader or a coach or business owner, again, doesn't need to dominate every meeting or conversation or every social media platform, because your ideas, your way of being, your story can actually echo long after you've left. And this is really the paradox of true influence. It can actually multiply when you do step back. So if we think about, that extroverted, often performative visibility, it often fades the moment attention shifts. And let's face it, people's attention are getting pulled in multiple different directions these days. And again, this message, like, you need to show up, you need to be visible, that performative visibility, it relies on constant maintenance. So you're always thinking about the next post, the next spotlight, and it creates a cycle of attention chasing where value is measured in likes or, follower counts or, how big of an applause you get on the stage. And the problem is, as soon as the spotlight moves on, so does the impact. And what felt quite urgent in that moment might be quite quickly forgotten. So I guess I'm trying to sort of reinforce here that extroverted, performative visibility isn't necessarily always the route to success, especially if it's not in alignment with who you really are. And I think this is the key here. It's recognizing, like, am I introverted? Am I extroverted? And really allowing yourself to kind of be true to who you are and show up in a way that is authentic to you. And for introverts, we really need a way of showing up that doesn't require on continually being seen. And it's really about leaving something behind that can shape how people think or decide or act in a way that doesn't require us to constantly be on. Now, in one way, I think introverts can sometimes have a natural edge because introverts are less inclined to chase that external validation. And because of that, they're freer to focus on depth. They're able to perhaps think more about the long-term vision that they're actually creating. So for a business owner, maybe for a coach, it might look like resisting the pressure to constantly build a loud personal brand and instead focusing on creating a body of work that outlives them. So my mission with She Leads is to create something that extends far beyond my own name. I want to build a legacy that's not just about me, but about what becomes possible for other women. The long-term goal here is not to build a brand that shines brightest whilst I'm in the spotlight, but to really build a movement that empowers all women and a movement that grows stronger precisely because it doesn't begin and end with me. Now, of course, a strong personal brand, if we're thinking about business or coaching, your story, it's undeniably important. It's how people connect with you, trust you, decide whether to follow your work and how they're influenced by you. But the truth, I think, that often gets overlooked is that your story doesn't have to be delivered in an extroverted way to be powerful. We're conditioned to believe that a story to have impact, it must be performed loudly. So shared on stages, broadcast daily on social media, told with this extroverted charisma and constant visibility. But impact, again, it doesn't come from volume. It comes from resonance. And an introvert can, let's say, they could write a deeply vulnerable post or story or book. Maybe it's recording a quiet podcast. It's maybe sharing their journey in smaller groups or communities. And those words can sometimes land with more force than, somebody who's loudly speaking on stage in front of thousands. So again, what matters is not how loud you are, but how true you are, because authenticity will always cut through the noise. And a personal brand that's built on depth and reflection and intentional sharing will actually create a stronger bond than one that's built on constant performance. And let's just talk about performative success again, because extroverts will often thrive in the immediacy of, let's say, live performance. So maybe it is speaking on a stage, maybe it is showing up live on social media. And it's really no wonder that this model of success actually seems so seductive, because from the outside, it often looks like it is the only way. These are the leaders who are being quoted, the people that are drawing in the crowds, the people that are filling up our social media feeds because the algorithm is favoring them because they are showing up so frequently. And the problem is that this then creates a very distorted picture of what true leadership really is. Because if the role models we celebrate are always the ones who shout the loudest or take up the most space, then quiet influence can sometimes get overlooked. And not because it lacks impact, but because it isn't packaged for immediate applause. So for introverts, this can be very misleading. It can feel like unless you mimic that extroverted playbook, so constantly performing, endlessly visible, your contribution won't count. But again, loud success, it's not always the thing that is working. It sometimes can be fleeting. It's the shine of this loud success. It depends on constant maintenance, more appearances, more content, more performance. But quiet success, by contrast, it is less visible, but often more enduring. So I think a really good example of this is my book. Many of you will know I wrote a book. And in fact, this kind of when I've been sort of sat with some questions for how I want to show up in business and work in life moving forwards, I think writing books for me as an extroverted introvert definitely feels aligned or authentic. But just taking this as an example though, writing my book, I didn't really rely on loud, relentless promotion, constant self-promotion online. Of course, we shared about it. We shared about it on social media, but, it wasn't this very sort of loud, big reveal. Instead, I think I just trusted the work itself. I trusted that what I'd written was very powerful, and I trusted that it would find the people that were meant to read it. And it has. Readers discover it quietly. It's often actually through just a keyword search on Amazon. So my book is called Self-Love and Spiritual Alchemy. So they're often searching for self-love. Often it's now through recommendation from somebody else who has read the book. And really, this is kind of a great example of quiet success. It's less visible in the moment. So I didn't have a big flashy book launch. I didn't do any real, daily live streams. And at the time, I just didn't even question that. There's been moments since then when I thought, oh, actually, I've seen other people do these sort of big book launches. And I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should have done something like that. But actually, I think what I have done is more enduring, and the book continues to circulate. It creates ripples of influence, long after its initial release date. And I think this is just a reminder that we don't have to constantly push for something for it to have impact. My book, it sits there quietly doing its work, reaching new audiences that I've never met before. And that's the power of depth over noise. This idea, your ideas, my ideas that live on beyond these moments of performance, and kind of our ideas and influence shaping lives in ways that we may not even fully see or recognize. Now, when it comes to success, the danger, it isn't that introverts can't succeed. I think it's that we're taught to pursue someone else's version of success instead of embracing a model that plays to our own strengths. And again, this world that's obsessed with constant posting and going live, the real power for introverted business owners and coaches lies in, I think, platforms and mediums that allow for more depth, more longevity, that quieter resonance. So this is where, for me, I think the written word and books is definitely something that I'm feeling more and more pulled to. And I think it remains one of the most underestimated tools of authority. In fact, our email list, where we connect with our audience via written word, via email, it still remains one of our most powerful marketing methods, our most powerful way to communicate with our audience, and also to inspire people to join our programs and to sign up to our coaching. So again, written words, and maybe it's blog posts, email newsletters, articles, they can often outlast dozens of social media posts. So unlike a fleeting Instagram story, writing can actually create a reference point that clients can bookmark, they can share, we can return to whenever they need clarity. And I think the written word can really position you as a thinker, not just, another voice in somebody's feed. And by the way, I'm saying this, I'm not saying that this way is right and the other way is wrong, because I think video is still very powerful and I will still choose to use that as a medium, but it just means that using it relentlessly may not necessarily be the way for everybody. Podcasting as well. I think podcasting for me, it feels something that I feel more pulled to. And it allows, I think, introverts to create influence in a way that feels maybe more spacious, more intentional. Podcasts can be quite intimate. They let your audience hear your voice and connect with your ideas, but without necessarily the performance pressure of standing on stage or showing up live or creating video. And I think when it comes to social media platforms, not all spaces are created equally. And noisy, fast-moving platforms, let's say, for example, Instagram. I love Instagram. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I will continue to be on there. But I think that platform can really drain your energy if you feel you need to compete with the demand for constant visibility. But let's take a platform like Pinterest, for example, which works a little bit more like a search engine than a social feed. And the thing with something like Pinterest is people come looking for solutions. And your content on a platform like Pinterest will continue to surface months or even years after you've posted it. And so this is an example actually of this asynchronous influence that I spoke about earlier, where your ideas are circulating, you're creating opportunities long after you've stepped away. There's not this constant need to be showing up. Now, I think perhaps one of the most dangerous things is that being an introvert has almost been mislabeled as a flaw or a barrier to success, and something, that has to be corrected. So if we think about the content online that tells us to, be more confident, often confidence is sort of seen in this perhaps quite extroverted way. And then introverts then spend their lives trying to fit themselves into someone they're not, chasing, this confident version of success, which is visible. It's, forcing these extroverted habits, maybe even shaming themselves into showing up when inevitably they feel drained by the effort. So, we're told to be more confident. And what that usually translates into is be louder, be more outspoken, share your truth, be more like them. And the problem is this equates confidence with volume, and it really misunderstands what confidence actually is, because confidence isn't about projecting more than you feel. It's not about filling the silence with words or chasing approval through a performance. We're told to fake it until you make it. And this just reinforces that belief that who you are isn't enough. And I think real confidence is something quieter and infinitely more powerful. It's that quiet knowing that you belong in the room, not because you're the loudest one, but because your presence alone, that's the thing that carries weight. Quiet confidence, it's about speaking when it matters, and even allowing your silence to carry authority. Confidence is authenticity. It's not this performance. It's saying, I don't need to shout to be heard because my energy, my clarity, my truth, these are things that are undeniable. And when introverts mistake loudness for confidence, they're just creating a cycle of self-betrayal, because they spend all of their energy performing instead of doing the things that they're meant to do. And I just like to remind you that, the people who are meant to work with you, they're going to buy from you or be led by you. These people aren't looking for performance. They're looking for your authenticity. They're looking for your presence. They're not asking you to be louder. They're asking you to be real. And this, I think, is why that mantra, fake it until you make it, it can be quite helpful maybe for extroverts, but I think it can be so damaging for introverts. And it also implies that confidence is something you've got to manufacture rather than something you can reclaim. And you don't need to fake anything. What you need is to remember who you are beneath the noise and the conditioning. Remember the way your ideas land when you stop trying to dress them up in somebody else's confidence or voice. And remember that your quieter way of leading is valid. And when you stop apologizing, this is what I want you to do if you are the introvert, is to stop apologizing for that. Start honoring it. And when you do this, you are going to create that quiet confidence that isn't just trying to get attention, but is actually really reshaping people, conversations, just by being present. And again, like success, it does not belong to the noisiest. It belongs to those who know when to speak, what to share, and know that sometimes their presence and their energy and their intention is enough. Now, as a reminder, integration is where the real transformation happens. Without integration, your growth, it just becomes a cycle of just collecting ideas and consuming information without ever embodying it. So remember to integrate, ladies. And to help you with this, I have created an exercise that you can access for free. It is available in the show notes. You can also visit she-leads.co/podcast. That's she-leads.co/podcast, and you will be able to download the integration exercise there. So I hope this all resonated with my introverts or extroverted introverts out there, and I very much look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. If today's episode lit something up in you and you are ready to build a coaching business that not only changes lives but creates the income and freedom you deserve, then right now you can request a free trial of our She Leads Academy coach training. To get your free trial, just head over to Instagram and visit us at she_leads.academy. You will find the link to the free trial in our bio. I cannot wait to see what's possible for you.